بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين فاطر السماوات والأرضين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Tonight is the Eve of Ashura, and it is a night of mourning and a night of living with Ahlul Bayt, their suffering and their grief. So tonight's majlis will be a little bit more brief than the previous night's majalis, inshallah. And inshallah we will spend the time after the majlis together in offering our condolences to the Prophet and the family of the Prophet, to the members of Ahlul Bayt, and to the Imam of our time. May Allah hasten his appearance. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Because the day of Ashura begins at sunset on the eve of Ashura, and that day of tribulation and suffering has begun. Sallu ala Muhammad. Over the last few nights, we have been discussing the concept of how our path as a Muslim in search of virtue and in search of salvation requires a journey on our part of deepening our understanding of the purpose of our life. And the instincts that we have, the natural tendencies that we have, they are something that give us an initial motivation. But then that feeling or that emotion can be deepened and can be honed so that it is something that makes it much better than it was before. A believer may do many of the same things that a non-believer will do. Because in light of our discussions, the most essential parts of Deen and of Islam are so important that Allah has put it within our human nature, so that a person might claim not to believe in God, but not just by the physical operation of every atom and every organ within their body, but even the natural orientation of their emotions. They will be doing many of those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded. But the difference is that a believer does those things for the sake of Allah, and that becomes a spiritually worthy deed, and one who does not ponder or one who does not think of that path might do it because it gives them satisfaction, or they might do it because it gives them praise and it's good for business, or it's good for politics, or for any other reason. And then the level of the benefit they get will be limited by their intention, by the depth of their intention and the depth of their intellect and their understanding. And so we shouldn't say that what is the difference between a believer and a non-believer? Believers look for love and get married and have families and work to support their families. And non-believers do many of the same things. So what is the difference? And don't look for that difference necessarily in something external. That, well, a believer will do that marriage in a different way, or express that love for their children in a different way. There are differences, but that is not the heart of what the difference is. The heart of the difference is that when a believer, according to his or her fitrah and according to his or her divinely inspired disposition and nature, gets married and then expresses his or her love for family, that is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for the sake of the other person and not for the sake of the self, but for a higher purpose. And so it is something that becomes an eternal act. It connects you to the other person. It connects you to your own true needs and gives you satisfaction. But most importantly, it connects you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to your eternal life and brings you eternal benefit and reward and salvation. And so the difference between the motivation of a believer and the motivation of a non-believer is where we should look for the heart of the effect of belief. Although, of course, because a believer has benefit of the teachings of religion, the way they express their love for their family, the way they interact with their fellow believers and fellow human beings will also be different on a superficial level from somebody who is not a believer. But sometimes you see studies that are done that are believers more charitable than non-believers. Do believers have one outward expression of goodness that society recognizes to a greater extent than non-believers? And sometimes in those quantitative measures, there is no measurable difference, or the believers may end up coming short, not measuring up. And whatever other problems there may be with those studies, in methodology, and how they conceive of a believer, and how they categorize those groups, whatever other problems there may be, there is a fundamental problem in that if a believer has one child and a non-believer has one child, if a believer cooks a meal at home and a non-believer gives money to charity, then it's not the case that that believer is serving themselves and that non-believer is being charitable. But that believer, by spending that money, by cooking a meal at home, by inviting their family or by inviting their friends, is doing so in order to honor the command of Allah and the relationships that Allah has blessed them with. That is an act of charity, even if they themselves are also benefiting from it. And that act of charity that a non-believer may give, it may be to alleviate a guilty conscience. It may be to get a tax deduction. It may be to help another person on a material level, thinking that they are a helper and the other person is a recipient and a taker. Or it may be altruistic on some level, but it can only be as deep as the values that you think about and that you believe in. And because faith gives us an infinite profundity, and you can simultaneously use the metaphor of depth and the metaphor of ascent, then there is no comparison on a superficial level between what a believer does and what a non-believer does. And that is illustrated in a hadith of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq alayhi as-salatu was-salam. A companion of the Imam came to the Imam. He had heard that Islam teaches us that we shouldn't be desirous of this world. طلب الدنيا is bad. So he said to the Imam, Wallahi inna lanatlub ad-dunya wa nuhibbu an nu'taha. We love this world, and we wish to be given more of this world. And the Imam said, تحب أن تفعل بها ماذا? When you are given the dunya, what do you want to do with it? And the person said that أعود بها على نفسي وعيالي وأصل بها وأتصدق بها وأحج وأعتمر. I'll spend it on myself, and I'll spend it on my family, and I will give gifts to my fellow believers, and I will give sadaqah, and I will go for hajj, and I will go for umrah. And the Imam says that you're mistaken in thinking this is طلب الدنيا. ليس هذا طلب الدنيا, هذا طلب الآخرة. That in itself is طلب الآخرة. Meaning that what you have described is part of your fitrah, to want to do those things. A trained fitrah, because you need to have access to revelation, at least to get to the hajj and the umrah part of the answer of that companion. But أعود بها على نفسي وعيالي وأصل بها وأتصدق بها. Those are things that are part of our fitrah that we don't need wahi for. And ahijju wa a'tamir are part of our fitrah that we will only be able to connect to and understand if our fitrah and our nature has been trained and been developed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Imam says that don't expect that the difference between the ethical teaching that we want you to develop and those who don't have that religious guidance is going to show up that when you receive the dunya, you want to do something entirely different from what others would want to do. But your motivation should be different. So that person, he didn't say, أعوذ بها على نفسي وعيالي لله. If that lillah part were clear in the questioner's mind, then he wouldn't have had the question that this is talab al-dunya. He came with the question because it was implicit, of course, as a believer, that you do what Allah wants. But he hadn't thought about it enough to realize that the fact that you want to do these things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes them part of your religious worship and not part of your material existence. If you had thought about it, then the question would have answered itself. Because when I say that أتصدق حبا لله or أصل قرابتي or إخواني لوجه الله, then it's clear that this is an act of worship. It becomes a question when you know that this is something that you want to do, because it brings you happiness and it brings you satisfaction. It's part of your humanity. And you don't realize that this is for the sake of Allah. The Imam says that you need to think better about what it means to want to do those things. As a believer, the desire you have and the fact that it brings you happiness is what starts the motivation to do good. It helps you. That is why we are taught in a hadith that Allah awla bihasanatina minna wa nahnu awla bisayyi'atina minhu. We have free will. But if you do good, then Allah gets the greater reward. And if you do evil, then you bear the responsibility. If we have free will, then it should be the same standard, not a double standard. If I get the blame for my sins, why shouldn't I get the credit for my good deeds? An example I give of that is, if you have, now they have these meals that you can order where everything is ready for you, the proportions, and how to mix the recipe, and the instructions, and you might even be able to click on a link and get the video demonstration. So if you order that recipe, again, we're not using Amazon, but some other ethical seller, and you order it, you prepare it according to instructions, and it turns out well. Do you get some credit? Yeah. But who deserves the main credit for that meal turning out well? Whoever designed and prepared that recipe and gave you good instructions, so all you have to do is add water, put it on the stove for a while or in the oven, and very straightforward, you can take care of it. Now, if you mess it up and you turn it into some kind of poison, then do you still say, well, they made the recipe? It's not a double standard. Because they facilitated a good result, هو أولى بحسناتنا منا. And if we mess it up, in spite of having a fitrah that pulls us towards good, نحن أولى بسيئاتنا منه. We are more worthy of our evil deeds. Because Allah gave us free will, but He gave us a nature that will move us towards good. And that is why in a hadith we are also told that righteousness is honored by the fact that even the evil claim to be righteous and wish to have a reputation as honorable and as good people. That shows how our human nature, even when we are not acting well, primes us to do well. But then what the Imam is telling the companion is, now don't just leave it at that, but deepen that good. So don't just be kind to your family and to your friends with sila and sadaqah and so on, because it makes you feel good, because it gives you a good reputation. That is a facilitating factor that gets you started. But then take off the training wheels and do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And on that journey, if we want to summarize the message that we are trying to reinforce, it is that we don't live life on our own terms, we live life on the terms of Allah. Meaning, when I do something that is part of my own self-interest and my own desire, and when I do something that would not come to me naturally, in both cases I do it for the sake of Allah. Now, in society, many of those institutions that used to facilitate our living according to terms beyond the self have begun to break down. And that means that we have to make a stronger effort ourselves. It used to be that your parents or your grandparents' home or village had a certain pull for even children and grandchildren. And now statistically, I think the average person stays in a home for 5 years or 7 years or something like that. And so people don't have that same pull of identity to where their roots or where their family may be. It used to be that people would be concerned about the family name. And now many people don't even know the name of their great-grandfather or their great-grandmother, let alone have a concern for the family name. It used to be that when Muslims used to endow money for philanthropy, then they would take pride not in naming it after themselves, the Sulayman Hasan Foundation, but naming it after an imam or a ma'soom, or at the very least naming it after a faqih or an alim from whom they learned and by whom they were inspired. And now in society, I'm not embarrassed to say that this is a foundation named after me or my own family. So these are all parts of our culture and our institutions. And with all the baggage that came with them, they reminded us that there is something beyond the self that we are to honor. And part of our religious obligation is to honor those affiliations and those obligations. But now when you can choose where to live and what to do and even what your gender is and anything about your identity, then you have to actively affirm that belief. That although I can live life on my own terms in a way that was not possible and was not even conceivable to people throughout most of human history, and in a way that might not be healthy for our own emotional or physical or spiritual well-being, just as that challenge has come by the erosion of those institutions, we have to create now the reinforcement that will ensure that we still believe in altruism, and we still believe in sacrifice, and we still believe in service and volunteering, and serving a cause outside of the self as the purpose of our life. I gave a few standards that we can use. One is, if I have a dua that I want, and I want it and nothing but. And if somebody comes and consoles me that, well, sometimes your greater good is not to have that, then my response is, doesn't God control what is the greater good? Can't God change my maslahah and my greater good to be in accordance with what I want? We have an answer for everything. So that is one sign that I'm not trying to serve God. I'm not trying to become an instrument of His purpose. I have my own agenda. And I want to use, just like some people use money to get what they want, some people use relationships to get what they want, I'm just using religion to get what I want. But it's serving the self. And the danger, though, is that if somebody's using money to get what they want, you can tell they're selfish. If somebody's using force to get what they want at gunpoint, then you can tell they're not a good person. But if I use religion and the power of religion and the honor that comes from religion and the power of dua to serve myself, then the damage that can do to my own religious identity and to the image of religion in society is far deeper and far more insidious, because it's not always as easy to catch it in others or in ourselves. And I might think that I'm serving God, I'm praying to God, when in reality I'm just serving myself and praying to myself and trying to get my own whim. And so that is why I want to emphasize the importance of remembering that whenever we approach religion, and anything about religion, it's not that you're going to do something different than you were doing yesterday, but you're going to ask, is it for God or is it for myself? And you're only going to move forward if you can answer in your conscience that this is not to serve my purposes, but it is to serve God. And so if you want to move into a better house or a bigger house, if you want to upgrade your material lifestyle, there's nothing wrong with that. That's also part of human nature. But You want to do it for the sake of Allah. And that means that we have to train ourselves to want to do it, not because it's comfortable, and not because it's easy, and not because it'll impress my friends, but because when I do that, then I can do more good. And that solves so many material problems that we have in society. There's people who, because they're rich, they become arrogant. My house is bigger than your house. I have more money than you. And again, I'm saying it like a child would say it, but with more sophisticated language, that's what many 73-year-olds or however old president might be, that's how many of adults think as well, not just children. It might be childish, or it might be more sophisticated when we express it, but that's the emotion. Or if we're smart, we think that I'm smarter than you, or I'm better than you at athletics. That arrogance comes from the fact that I don't realize that this is an amanah given to me, not something that I deserve. There's also the flip side, though, that some people, if it comes from a good place of humility, they're embarrassed that I'm wealthier than so many people in this world and I didn't do anything to deserve it, and so I feel guilty. You've heard of the I went to school in Boston syndrome? If you went to a good school, then own it. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. That's not the biggest blessing that Allah has given you, but it is a blessing. Own it, because when you tell people what blessings Allah has given you, then the first thing you'll find, and anybody who's coming to a windfall will know that immediately you discover cousins you never knew existed. And you discover long-lost best friends that you never knew existed. And because it is a trust, you want to find out, so that you can then judiciously and responsibly meet those needs and honor those relationships, not get taken advantage of. I told you earlier to be a doormat, but not that kind of doormat. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What we meant by it is to be of service. وَجَعَلَنِي مُبَارَكًا أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُ أَيْنَ الطَّاعَةِ. Allah made me beneficial wherever I may be. And that is the attribute of prophets, and that is the attribute that we should try to develop. And so, I'm not embarrassed by the fact that Allah has given me an education or material resources or a certain talent that other people don't have. I'm not embarrassed because I don't see it as a coincidence. That what did I do to deserve it? And then I have this big existential angst that comes upon me and takes me over, and I start to maybe hide or express some kind of shame at what I've given. I see it as a gift, and I see it as a responsibility. It's a trust. Not that I brag about it, but I'm comfortable in my own skin and in the resources that Allah has given me, because I'm trying to discover how is it that I should use and spend this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And part of that is أَعُوذُ بِهَا عَلَى نَفْسِي وَعِيَالِي. I'll spend it on myself and my family, but for the sake of Allah. And so I will involve my family in my spiritual ideals, not in just my material goals. That is how we use what Allah has given us for His sake. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. Now, what if I say that I've done my obligations and now that second test seems a little bit strict? Second test is what? That when you get a windfall, what's the first thought that comes to your mind? And I said, if that's a little tough for you, then at the very least you can say, what is it that gives me the greatest satisfaction? So forgive the first thought. An-nadratul ula lak. This hadith says, forgive the first glance, the first khatir, the first thought, and then say that at least what is it that gives me the greatest satisfaction? What if I say that, well, I've done my obligations, and now I just want to throw up my legs and relax a little bit. Is that so bad? It's not so bad. You have certainly that right. But in Surah Al-Hajj, Allah describes the ideal that we're striving for. وَلَيَنْصُرَنَّ اللَّهَ مَنْ يَنْصُرُهُ. Allah will help those who help Him. In other words, if you make yourself somebody whose entire life is for Allah, then because you are an instrument of Allah's purpose, then Allah's decree will be for your benefit. وَلَيَنْصُرَنَّ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَنْصُرُهُ. Because you are dedicating yourself to Allah, then Allah is dedicating His decree insofar as it affects you for your good. Use you for His purpose. Who are those people who are Ansarullah? Who are those people who are the vessels of God's grace and God's mercy and God's purpose? They don't have all the wealth in the world. They don't have all the power in the world. But their thoughts are always first and foremost about how they can serve Allah better. So, Inna Allah laqawiyyun aziz. Allah has all power, He has all might. But because He's using these people to be the instruments of the accomplishment of His goal, الَّذِينَ إِن مَّكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ وَأَمَرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَنَهَوْا عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَلِلَّهِ عَاقِبَةُ الْأُمُورِ. Allah controls everything. But when these people get the extra dollar, when they get that promotion, when they get that extra hour, whatever they get, everything that you get in this world is a form of tamkeen or mukna or strength that Allah gives you. الَّذِينَ إِن مَّكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. When Allah gives them that tamkeen or that mukna, when He gives them that strength, then what's the first thing that comes to their mind? The Quran mentions certain things. أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةِ. Priority is إِقَامَةُ الصَّلَاةِ. وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةِ. Their priority is to purify themselves by giving back or by utilizing for the purpose of Allah. وَأَمَرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَنَهَوْا عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. And implicit within أَمْرُ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ and نَهِي عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ, before you do amr, you must be mu'tamir. Meaning before you command what is good, you have to represent what is good in your own life and do it. And before you do nahi anil munkar, you have to be muntahi anil munkar. You have to avoid what is evil in your own life. And so comprehensively that is telling us that your first thought, whatever Allah gives you a new blessing is, how does this fit into my purpose? So what about when you just want to kick your legs up and relax? Well, that is part of your purpose. When you fulfilled your prayer and your hajj and your basic obligations, then you should also fulfill your need for leisure, and your need for relaxation, and your need for physical exercise to strengthen your body, and mental exercise to strengthen your mind and to rest, and all of those things you already should be doing, just like you've done your khums, just like you've done your salah. You should always be in a position where you are fulfilling all of your obligations with what Allah has given you. And you should always be in a position when you're striving with what Allah is going to give you next, to first use it for His pleasure and for His purpose. So once again, that doesn't mean that it is about what you do for others, or what you do on the surface. Yesterday I said, for example, one of the things that would be good is for Hajj. For those of us who may not be very wealthy, that we make that intention that we will do Hajj. And we set aside a portion of our savings every year in order to be able to renew our commitment to those noble sites, the shrines of Ma'sumin alayhimus salatu wassalam, Hajj and Umrah and Ziyarah. And if we are more blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we might say, why not give charity? Because every Hajj and even every Umrah and even every Ziyarah is a considerable expense. It can feed quite a few people. It can do a great deal of material good. But if you remember that it's not about volunteerism in the sense of serving others. It is about altruism and sacrifice in the sense of dedicating yourself to Allah. That requires you to deepen your own connection to Allah. And the wealthier that you are, or the more blessed that you are, there are studies that tell us that people lose empathy and an ability even to perceive emotions in other people's faces as they become more removed from deprivation and subsistence lifestyle themselves. Because no longer is the frown on the police officer's face likely to be the difference between life and death. You have a lawyer for that. You have other resources at your disposal. Even the way you're dressed might be effective in determining how officials and law enforcement will deal with you. Because of that, gradually we lose the ability to empathize. Not through our own fault, but because we haven't struggled for food. Even when we fast, we don't really know what it's like to be hungry. Even when we are saddened by oppression that takes place, we don't really know what it's like. So we need to, if we want to sacrifice, we need to spend time going for Hajj ourselves. And when you go for Hajj and you dedicate yourself to Allah, then I am sure when you come back, you will realize that there is much more that you can cut out of your material goals, which were for yourself. And that's not going to take away from your charitable giving, but it will increase the amount of charity that you are going to give as well. The purpose of the Hajj is not so that you then give 50% more charity, but that will be one of the effects and one of the benefits of it. And just like somebody who is at a lower income doesn't need a tax haven, those who are more blessed by Allah, they need a spiritual tax haven. And that spiritual tax haven is to ensure that they are making a firm commitment to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the resources that they have been given, and that is what comes first to their mind, and that is what gives them the greatest satisfaction. And part of that, if I truly believe that to honor the house of Allah is a great gift that I can be given, and to ensure that Hajj is not without believers being present in those sacred sites, praying on our behalf and on behalf of fellow believers, then I might not just want to go for Hajj, because religion also can be self-serving, and religious pilgrimage can also turn into religious tourism. And we want to avoid that. And so then, it might make sense for me to say that I am going to dedicate a portion of my resources every year for Hajj. Inshallah, I will be able to go. But I can't go every year. For one thing, I'm told that sometimes people come back with a cough, and it takes a while for it to cure itself. That's what people say when they go for Hajj. So I will go, or I will send someone. Because it's for the sake of honoring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for the sake of myself. And there is a hadith of Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salatu wassalam, that if a person is given the blessing by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send 3 people for Hajj. If you can send 3 people, sponsor 3 people to go for Hajj. فَقَدْ اشْتَرَى نَفْسَهُ مِنَ اللَّهِ بِالثَّمَنِ. That person has paid the price of their own soul and saved it from hell. Not that they will be worthy of God's mercy or God's forgiveness. They have bought themselves. And now, in that image that Allah is giving, you own yourself again. And then Allah will not ask you about your material affairs and about your rizq. Where was it acquired from and how was it? And according to one narration, if you have debts on the Day of Judgment that need to be cleared, then Allah will be your advocate. It's not just a high-priced law firm. It is Allah who will be your advocate to help you clear those claims that other people may have against you, because you have bought فَقَدْ اشْتَرَى نَفْسَهُ مِنَ اللَّهِ بِالثَّمَنِ. You have bought from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when I say that, that itself then can become part of that religious tourism. Now, that sounds nice. I want to buy myself from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me try to save up and send 3 people to... Again, these are means that Allah tells us the significance and the importance. And these are ways that Allah tells us how important these actions are and how pleasing to Him they are. Do it because Allah is pleased by it and get the benefit of that protection from punishment. And don't do it for the sake of a reward. Don't do it for the sake of something that is for yourself. That's a way that Allah has facilitated that altruism. We live on the terms of Allah. We view everything that is given to us as a gift from Allah. Or in the words of Imam Hasan, إِنَّهُ هَوَّنَ عَلَيَّ مَا نَزَلَ بِي أَنَّهُ بِعَيْنِ اللَّهِ. Whatever tribulations I have suffered, the only thing that gives me consolation is that Allah sees it. When was it that Imam Hussein said that sentence? What was the tribulation that caused the Imam to remind himself and to express that religious principle? That was when his young 6-month-old child, on the verge of dying of thirst, was brought to the Imam, or according to a narration, the Imam came to his sister and said, "Bring me my child so that I can look upon his innocent face once again," and bid him farewell. And then when Ali Asghar was brought to the Imam and he looked at the extent at which hunger and the suffering in Karbala had affected the child, the Imam saw that that infant would not be able to survive, perhaps even until that evening. And so the Imam said, "Bring me a cloak." And the Imam lovingly cradled his young son, according to some narrations, 6 months in age. According to some narrations known as Abdullah al-Radi, and as other narrations say Ali al-Asghar. The Imam cradled that young infant in his arms. And normally when the Imam went before the enemy, when he went to fight, he would ride a horse. When he went to give a message, he would ride a camel. But now when the Imam went with a petition, and let no noble person ever have to bring a request or ask for something from a wretched human being. But now when the Imam went to ask for mercy, he went on foot. And he cradled and shielded Ali Asghar from the sun and from the sand and from the wind under his own cloak. Later, Harmalah would say that when I aimed the arrow, so closely had Ali Asghar cradled himself had Imam cradled Ali Asghar in his own embrace, that there was only one part of his body that I could see, and that is where I aimed my arrow. That was the neck of Ali Asghar. And that is why the arrow struck the neck of Ali Asghar, because that was the only part of his body that was exposed. The Imam came to the enemy, and they thought that maybe he had come to ask for mercy for himself. Maybe he had brought a Quran to ask for them to save his life. When he revealed what he was hiding with the cloak, they saw it was an infant. And the Imam said, do you not see how he is so weak that he is not able to move his limbs? But it is only his lips that are opening and closing, gasping for air. And even the enemy who had killed and murdered so many noble souls from the family of the Prophet, a commotion came among them, and they began to say that we should not withhold water from an innocent child. What crime does the child have? And Umar ibn Sa'ad turned to his archer, Harmala ibn Qahir al-Asadi, la'natullahi alayhi, and said, Ya Harmala, iqta' kalam al-Husayn, or iqta' niza' al-qawm. Put an end to this commotion. Put an end to the words of Imam Hussein. Harmala aimed an arrow, and I don't know if he would have heard the wailing of an elderly lady, or saw the shadow that the veil of Lady Fatima Zahra would have cast upon the sands of Karbala. But that arrow, as it left the bow of Harmala, it came and it lodged itself in the neck of Ali Asghar. The arrow with 3 prongs was larger than the neck. And so history tells us that it was not that the child's neck was pierced with an arrow, but it was as if a sword had slaughtered Ali Asghar. From one ear to the other ear, Ali Asghar was slaughtered. And it was at that moment that for the first time in many hours, some movement came to the limbs of Ali Asghar, and he hugged Imam Hussein, and Imam Hussein cupped his hands and picked the blood of his infant son in his hands. And it is said that the Imam looked towards the heavens and looked towards the earth, and with the insight of an Imam, he saw that the sky trembled at the thought of that innocent blood being thrown towards the heavens, and the earth shook at the thought of that blood falling to the earth. According to a narration of our 5th Imam, not a single drop of that blood fell to the earth. The Imam put that innocent blood on his face and on his clothing, and he said, this is how I will go to my Creator on the day of judgment, and I will say that my enemy did not even spare the life of my innocent son. And it is at that time that the words which express the feeling of the Imam are said to have been composed. Shi'ati mahma sharibtum ma'adbin اذكروني أو سمعتم بشهيد أو غريب فاندبوني. Oh my Shia, who are not alive today and not here, whenever you drink sweet water, remember my thirst. And whenever you hear of someone who was killed unjustly, or someone who was moved away from their homeland, then remember my suffering and my martyrdom. ليتكم في يوم عاشوراء جميعا تنظروني. If only you could be with me on Ashura and watch as I كيف أستسقي لطفلي فأبوا أن يرحموني, sought mercy for my child, and they refused to show mercy to me, and they refused to show mercy to Ali Asghar. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. فسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون.
Brothers and sisters, that concludes our majalis downstairs. For those of you who are staying for Matam, I would kindly request you to please exit to your left, quietly and respectfully. For those of you who are are leaving at this time, I would also kindly request you to please exit quietly and respectfully. In particular,